I'd like to welcome everyone to being here today, and we have a efficient agenda to go through. We've got some good topics to cover as far as informational purposes and a few things to be voting upon. Once again, so that everybody knows and remembers, and we do this every time, this meeting is being broadcast over the internet, and so look sharp, look happy, look like you're having fun. And I guess we should silence our cell phones, which I will do right now myself. There we go. Okay, agenda item number 2 is consideration of the approval of the minutes from the June 24th committee meeting. Do I have any questions or discussion? Or motion. I have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. Agenda item 3 is consideration of the consent agenda, the consent calendar. We have actually no items on the consent calendar.
Approval.
Well, let me ask this, David. Does anyone want to put anything on the consent calendar? I think our agenda is still pretty efficient today, and we'll approve that, I guess. Item number 4 is public testimony relating to the committee, and still to my knowledge, we have no anyone signed up for testimony, so we're good with that. All right, so we'll get to work. Agenda item 5A is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the report on financial aid for college students in Texas, fiscal year 2014, HB 1, 84th Legislature, General Appropriations Act, Rider 30, page 3, section 49. And Charles Pools, Deputy Commissioner for Student Financial Aid Programs, will provide a report on the significant findings. Charles, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And I'll just clarify, I'm the Deputy Assistant Commissioner, not the Deputy Commissioner. Haven't gotten quite that far
I gave you a promotion. Just take it.
Since 1993, the Coordinating Board has prepared an annual report on financial aid in Texas for the LBB. This report summarizes how state, federal, institutional, and private financial aid funds are used to support students in our state. The report provides summary information breaking down financial aid across categories such as sources of aid, income levels, geographic distribution, and ethnicity. 150 pages of appendices are also included, providing a much greater level of detail. Since the inception of Closing the Gaps, this annual report has focused on aspects of our aid programs as they relate to achieving those goals. With the recent adoption of 60 by 30 text, the annual report will undergo a makeover in the coming year in order to provide insight into how financial aid can influence and support the 4 key goals of our strategic plan: attainment, completion, marketable skills, and student debt, while still providing the information deemed critical for the LBB. The annual report provides context for our state financial aid programs and how over 875,000 Texas students are using financial aid to help cover their costs of education. The report is based on FY14 data, which is the most recent year for which complete information is available. As you can see in the pie chart on the left, the majority of financial aid to students in Texas is in the form of loans, almost 52%, while grant funding provides almost 48% of the remaining aid. Work study currently plays a very small role in the financial aid equation. The pie chart on the right indicates the sources of financial aid funds for students in Texas. The federal government, by far, provides the largest amount of funding in the form of loans, grants, and work study, just over 71% of all funds, followed by the institutions themselves, over 13%, private sources, almost 9%, and finally the state-funded financial aid programs, which provide 6.5% of the overall financial aid awarded to students in Texas in FY14. Compared to FY13, institutional funding increased almost $69 million. Private funding increased just over $58 million. State funding increased by $43.6 million, largely due to increased Texas grant funding. And federal funding increased over $17 million. Looking at the state programs specifically, we can see the funding has been awarded through the state's 7 primary programs. Additional aid is awarded through smaller programs, through exemptions and waivers managed at the campus level, as well as through TPEG and other programs funded through set-asides and donations at the campus level. Texas Grant, as you're aware, dwarfs all of our other programs, providing almost 55% of all state funding. At the other end of the spectrum, the Texas Work-Study Program is the smallest of our primary programs and provides less than 2% of the total state funding. Funding for our 3 signature grant programs, Texas Grant for 4-year publics, TEG for the private institutions, and TEOG for our 2-year institutions, is on the rise, as you can see in this slide. Texas Grant and TEOG have recovered from the cuts that had to be made after the 2011 fiscal year, though TEG is still well below its FY11 funding level, and the number of recipients in these grant programs is also at a 5-year high. As we enter the 2016-2017 biennium, funding for all of these programs has increased even further, with over $357 million for Texas Grants, over $96 million in TEG, and almost $47 million in TEOG appropriated for the first year of the biennium. Excuse me. Even with the $9.4 billion in financial aid through federal, institutional, private, and state funding, this graph demonstrates the significant financial need that still exists within the state of Texas. Beyond financial assistance, students and their families are expected to contribute towards education, as is represented in the purple box at the top of each of these bar charts. However, as you can see, even taking into consideration the fact that students and their families have an expectation towards supporting higher education, there is still the need for significantly more aid to help cover the gap between the cost of education, shown by the red line, and what is currently available to help finance these costs. The extent of unmet need is significant, and the coordinating board realizes that addressing this issue will need to occur in stages, which is why current consideration is being made toward focusing specifically on tuition, fees, books, and supplies as the core elements needing funding. The need-based grant programs do target the neediest students, though as you'll see here, there's still a reliance on loan funding to cover the costs of education. Looking at financial aid recipients coming from families with total family income of less than $10,000, 91% are receiving grant funds, while almost 54% are also relying on loans to cover their costs. You may wonder why a student from such a low income would not receive grant funds. It's most likely that they either failed to meet one of the other criteria beyond demonstrating financial need, such as not completing their financial application on time, not maintaining required enrollment levels, or failure to meet satisfactory academic progress expectations, or that the institutions had simply exhausted their grant funding and were not able to provide an award to the student. While we continue to make progress toward financially supporting Texas students in the completion of their certificates and degrees, there is still more work to be done. Thank you very much. Any questions that I might be able to answer for you?
Commissioner?
Do you have do we have data on the breakdown between Pell Grants and other forms of financial assistance or federal financial assistance? I'd like the board to know if we have the data, what percentage of grant aid comes from the feds as opposed to the state.
We have the ability to pull those numbers through the information that comes through the financial aid database system. I don't know those specifically, but we do have the ability to pull that.
The reason I make that point is up until about 3 years ago, I think we were among the states, of 5 or 6 states, that relied most heavily on federal grant aid, which is one of the reasons that I tried to go. John Wyatt typically comes with me, go to Washington at least once a year and remind members of the Texas congressional delegation how heavily reliant we are on Pell Grants. But it would be good to, maybe in time for the October board meeting, you can put that data together.
Great, will do.
David?
So along that line, your slide number 2 clearly indicates that the federals are a very, very significant source of funding for this.
Yes.
Do you have us benchmarked against other states? Obviously, we're in a very competitive posture. We want to compete. Our new strategic plan is competitive for our future. And along the lines of what the commissioner said, is there something you can prepare for us when we meet in October to look at us benchmarked against the rest of the other states? And how much we are reliant on federal funds for that?
Compared to the other states. I will look into that. I had actually just put a little star next to that and thinking about both that for October as well as we rethink this financial aid report, because we really do want to overhaul it now that we're looking at 60 by 30 text. It's been a very similar report for many years. I think comparison to other states would be a good thing for us to be constantly measuring. I will take a look at that and see. I actually go to a meeting of the State Student Grant Association, and we'll have an opportunity to talk to them about kind of what measurements they do as well. So I will look into that.
Thank you. And then on your slide number 5, your second from the last, clearly as you move to the right side, there's an opportunity for affordability as we try to get our students to take the most cost-efficient side of this, and there's opportunity to go to private universities, but they are rather expensive, and the benefits through grants and others are not there. So I guess what I would like to hear from you is, as we look at this new strategic plan, how do we get our students channeled through the most cost-efficient way that utilizes the resources maximally in order to achieve their desire to get a higher education degree? Because, I mean, clearly as we look to the right side, you know, we're focused on the demand side, but what about the supply side?
Yep.
You know, higher ed is changing. It's changing dramatically. And we've got to be more efficient in the way that we educate these students from a per dollar per student per credit hour basis. And that will be interesting to see how that dynamic works out.
I think that's an important piece for us to look at, and also look at historically within the board. You know, one of the very first programs that we had started was the TEG program for the privates, and then with the changes in the costs over the years, introduced the highly successful Texas Grant Program and the TEOG program, and needing to stop and look at those things and see, okay, how do we want the funds directed in the most effective way, in the most cost-efficient way? I know at the retreat yesterday, you all talked about some of the different ideas on how we might look at trying to encourage completion, and how we might retarget some of the funding to make sure it's going towards the most effective pieces. I think that's a critical piece for us to begin analyzing, or to continue analyzing.
And I think exactly along those lines, I completely agree. And then, you know, how do we make sure that parents, students, the public understands that and knows that there's different pathways from which to achieve that, and mapping those out so that you choose the pathway that is the most efficient for you and for your family, and making sure that people know that. I think that, and once again, Charles, I really appreciate this work, and if we, you know, asking for different ways to slice and dice it, I think that as we move forward, this is the information we really want to see, because once again, everything we talked about yesterday is trying to align everything we're doing with the strategic plan.
Yep.
And this information is absolutely critical to being able to fulfill and meet the goals of the strategic plan. So this really seems to me to become even more foundational as we move forward, as far as our committee and the board really having a good grasp and understanding of what all of this is and what all the options are and the different formulas that come from it.
Great.
And if we can disaggregate the data at the federal level, and for Texas, and then if we can get comparable data from other states, we ought to send that data to the members of our congressional delegation. Work with John White to do that.
Okay, will do. I appreciate your input. It's going to help us improve this report for the future.
Thank you, Charles. And I think you're staying put. Because agenda item 5B is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the report on student loan default prevention and financial aid literacy pilot program, Senate Bill 680, 83rd Legislature, and Charles, Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Student Financial Aid Programs, will provide an additional brief report on the findings.
Okay. Created
My bad.
by... Oh, sorry.
I needed a motion on the previous one. You
sorry.
know when Bill walks up, you know at that moment you're going, what did I forget? So, I have a motion.
Point of information, I had made a second on the previous motion, and I realize I am not a member of the committee. So, for the record, the previous motion and acceptance probably
But that was a
seconded.
consent calendar that we had nothing to.
No, Dr.
minutes.
Farias had also seconded it simultaneously, so the record should reflect that it was Dr. Farias, and I will remain silent. It will be very difficult for me to do that, but I will remain silent.
All right, so we're straight on the previous. I have a motion and a second to accept agenda item 5A. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. Thank you, Bill. Now, Charles, agenda item 5B.
Created by the 83rd Legislature, the Texas Student Loan Default Prevention and Financial Aid Literacy Pilot, which I'll simply refer to as the pilot moving forward, provides an opportunity to assess how various interventions impact a student's understanding and approach to educational debt. While created prior to the adoption of 60 by 30 texts, the pilot has an opportunity to provide insight into activities that can support and inform the student debt goal of the coordinating board's new strategic plan. This initial annual report is focused on laying out the groundwork for the pilot. Future annual reports will focus on assessing the impact of the pilot's features. THECB entered into an MOU with TG to administer the features of this 6-year pilot, drawing on TG's 35 years of experience administering federal educational loans and providing informational resources for students and families regarding the financing of higher education. Senate Bill 680 required that the pilot include at least one school from each sector of higher education: 4-year public, private, 2-year, and career schools. In discussions with TG, the coordinating board determined that a larger set of institutions would provide for a stronger pilot, so a dozen schools were initially selected to participate. 2 of the initial career schools have left the program as they were not able to dedicate the time to the pilot activities. An additional career school has been selected and is working to become involved. School selection was based on cohort default rates, which is the percentage of a graduating class who go into default on their student loan within the first 3 years after graduation. Each institution participating has either a cohort default rate that has increased at a higher than average rate or a cohort default rate that is above 20%. Ultimately, the pilot is based on 3 core goals: the financial consequences of borrowing, the financial consequences of academic and career choices, and financial strategies. These goals, in turn, should result in students making wiser borrowing and academic decisions while in college, as well as wiser financial and repayment decisions after completing their certificate or degree program. Ideally, this will lead to both greater student success and to lower cohort default rates in the state of Texas. Based on these goals, TG developed 10 behaviors to be promoted and influenced by the pilot, which you can see here. Some of these behaviors are very specific, such as being able to calculate the monthly repayment on a loan, while others are much broader, such as developing short-term, mid-range, and long-term financial goals. Each of these behaviors is targeted at achieving at least one, if not all three, of the pilot's core goals. The features of the pilot were designed to achieve the goals set forth in the legislation through the creation of a campus culture that promotes more thoughtful student finance and career decisions. They were developed to be cost-effective by leveraging existing TG financial education programs, using low-cost delivery mechanisms, and targeting the most labor-intensive efforts on borrowers most at risk of failing to graduate and/or repay their loans. Again, we see the fact that even though the pilot's creation started before the adoption of 60 by 30 techs, the pilot has the opportunity to influence the achievement of our goals even beyond student debt, such as helping students consider marketable skills as part of their career planning that will influence their expected careers and salaries. Five specific features are being created to achieve the goals and influence the targeted behaviors of the pilot. Default prevention plans are created with each individual institution as a mechanism to engage the campus and to identify target populations at each school. Train the trainer activities allow TG to pass on its knowledge and expertise to staff on each campus, so that institutions can offer student financial education sessions on 8 different topics as they see fit. An integrated counseling approach is being developed to help identify how financial counseling can be integrated across the financial aid, career services, and academic advising offices. Financial tips are sent to students via email and social media to help improve student understanding of debt and financial aid. And finally, one-on-one financial coaching is being offered to targeted students to assist them in developing a personalized borrowing and financial plan. If there's any questions you have about the pilot, I'd be glad to answer those.
So one of the issues we talked about yesterday in our strategic discussion was the platform that students who would best receive this information and feedback. And several of our staff indicated that most students have no idea what their current debt is, what the constraints of that is, and really, if we're talking about first-generation students, their parents have financial illiteracy.
Yep.
And that is a particular issue. So as I look at the financial coaching, is there an opportunity for us to, within this program, within this Senate Bill 680, to create an app that can go onto a smartphone, a website, some other type of electronic platform? These students are very savvy in that, where they could actually manage their account and understand that if you do this, if you borrow this, if you make this choice, if you go to this school, this is what it's going to cost, and this is what the ramifications downstream are. And also to reconnect the parents in this, so that parents who are not necessarily literate on higher education or financing of that, how do we get them to understand your 8th grader needs to be prepared to do this within the next 2.5 years, so they're in a position where they could do that? Are those components of this, or is that sort of standalone? How do we take the next step? Because our new strategic plan is not going to be successful unless we're successful in doing these things.
One of the great things about the pilot is it really provides us with the opportunity to try different things. So as opposed to it just being at the start of the pilot, here's the stuff we're going to do, and we're just going to do it for 6 years and see if it works, we really have the opportunity throughout the pilot to be looking at each feature, deciding whether we should continue those features, deciding whether we should add new features, whether we should remove new features. And so that is one of the things that we're currently doing with TG, is to really discuss, okay, what of these pieces are really working? Are there other ways we need to be approaching these things? How do we best get the information to be received by the student? There's general agreement that the ideas that are currently in the pilot project should all have the impact of helping students understand things better. But the key is, how do we get the students to actually hear those things? How do we actually get them to retain the information and utilize the information? And so that's what we're beginning to talk about is, based on these features, based on what we've seen in the first year, based on what we've seen with the schools and the various levels of participation that each school has taken, are there things that we want to take out of the features, and are there things such as the potential for apps or social media or other pieces like that that we want to put into the pilot? So I think what you're talking about is absolutely something that we can be talking about in the pilot.
I would, because you brought that idea up yesterday, and it was one, and I wasn't sure. So the app that you're first envisioning is one that would be example of if this, then that, right? Kind of a pre. And then, but I also thought that Christina or somebody had mentioned about something, wouldn't it be that next step of that was I actually have an app that truly manages where I am throughout and during the process. I mean, the first step seems like that would not be horribly difficult to do, but I just think that that's a great tool, and then that could evolve into something that really is actionable onto my individual career, my path through higher ed.
Yep. And financial aid literacy and default prevention, you're really talking about three, not necessarily populations, but three stages of the student life cycle. There's the time leading up to when they go to school, to try to get them to understand what all these options are and what potentially might be happening to them. There's the period of time when they're in school, when they're actually taking these loans and, kind of setting the stage for what is going to be their existence afterwards. And then there's the time after they've graduated. Typical default prevention programs have focused very much on the third stage. Once they're out of school, how do we keep them out of default? Whereas the unique thing about this pilot is to be able to talk to them in those previous two stages, talk to them while they're in school to help inform the decisions they're making that is going to create their reality afterwards, as well as trying to help them understand what are the opportunities as they move into school. So I think that what you've been discussing are very important pieces on how to take that, what typically has been a post-graduation, post-school concept, and really move it into the time when they're in school and before they even go.
So along that lines, I would think you would want a fourth phase, which is the preparatory phase, where you get eighth graders to create an account on an app, very similar to an account on an airline app, to say, okay, if I'm going to go somewhere, how do I get there? How much does it cost me? Where do I get to sit? What do I have to pay? How am I going to pay it back? They and parents can then prepare, because that's really the critical phase, is getting eighth graders to look at this with a longer-term approach. And how am I going to finance this? And then what is the back-end ramifications? You're exactly right. We've had three phases, and we're focused on phase number 3, which is you got a mountain of debt. How are you going to get out of it? How do we keep them from getting a mountain of debt? How do we create economic literacy and the financing of their higher education career and those opportunities? I really think that is where we need to focus, so that we get the future student, the potential student, excited about the fact you can do this and we can help you finance it. And we talked about partnering with the foundation and other foundations. We have financial partners out there. The banking and financial industry finances this. They're certainly not interested in pursuing defaults. That's financially not a good book of business for them. They need to be a participant in this because they're educators, and they can help us be educated about how to be financially responsible with debt and how to manage debt. And managing debt is a marketable skill, and that's part of our strategic plan. So these are things we discussed yesterday quite extensively And so I would encourage your team on this pilot to really get their hands around this, and the commissioner and his team know what we discussed yesterday. So I'm excited about this and encourage that this could go really a long way, very far, very fast, to help our future students.
Great.
Christine?
Another idea that I'm kind of thinking about, I don't know if it's directly related or is the issue of, I guess, being savvy with the loan money. I know of a lot of students that, like friends or friends of friends that have used these student loans and been like, oh, sweet, I just got $10,000, and blow it on other expenditures. And so, like, I guess part of this app would be like, okay, also a little bit of education on what's the proper usage of a loan. It's not to go party with your friends, which I do know of several students that had done that, and they're like, oh, I've got a lot of student loans now.
Yep.
So
I think that's a critical piece, and there's a piece that we've been talking about is this pilot will be a success if we can figure out how to get the students to consume the information that we're giving them. Over the years, there's a classic example of what's the cost of a pizza if you use a student loan to pay for it. That was something that was used about 10, 20 years ago. Had a lot of flyers and stuff back in the paper age and everything. But it was using that specific example of, if you get a pizza every week and you use a student loan to cover it, here's what that pizza is going to cost you. Those pieces are great sets of information. It's figuring out how do we get the students to actually consume this information, and thinking about not just working with the schools and the financial aid administrators and us trying to figure out, but trying to get the students involved to tell us, how will you receive this information from us? What's the best way to get it to you so that you'll do something with it? Because I think what you've talked about is critically important.
Any other, Javed?
When you give a student loan, you just don't hand them the money. You give them directly to the institution or to buy books or whatever. You just don't hand them the money to go buy new skis or.
Well, if the loan is in excess of what their account statement is, they can get that money in a check form. It really is specifically to be able to use towards their other costs of education. Best example is a student who's living in an apartment as opposed to living on campus. They're going to have to pay their landlord. They're not going to be paying the institution. And so there are times that students will get the money in a check that they are supposed to be budgeting and utilizing to pay their rent, et cetera. And over the 24 years that I worked in financial aid offices, unfortunately, usually about once a year, we'd have a student who had gotten a check and just bought some skis or something like that, and then wanted another loan to pay for their rent and things like that. So I think that it's critical that we look at, how do we help them understand? How do we target the money towards the most critical expenses, and help raise that education level, because the cost is more than it was in the past, and we need more skills, more marketable skills for them to understand how do we do this successfully.
Can you also get financial institute involved in loaning them the money, because those financial guys can educate these people when they get the loan that what you'll be paying back and the consequences of that? Or do you just directly write them a check without, educating them?
Currently, there is a set of information that's provided to students by way of entrance counseling and exit counseling and some other things to help them understand what these loans are. Interestingly, TG did a study on the effectiveness of that counseling, and it started to come out as to, kind of using the example of, I'll use the example of maybe when you put an app on your phone and it brings up the thing that you're supposed to read the whole thing and then say agree, and supposedly we've all read the whole thing before we hit agree. Unfortunately, that's what's happening with some of these counseling and with the master promissory notes, that all the information is there and they've clicked all the right buttons to say that they know this information, but the retention of the information is almost non-existent. And so that's one of the things that we're really looking at with this pilot is how do we get that retention to happen so that they can apply that marketable skill of I know how to manage my money, I know how to manage my debt, I know how to avoid my debt in the first place.
Any other questions? Need a motion to approve? David, second?
Second.
Nell? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. All right, Charles, continuing on. Agenda item 5C is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee for approval of the nominated members of the Financial Aid Advisory Committee. There is supplemental information on the goldenrod paper at your place. Dr. Charles Pools will be available to answer any questions that we have.
I move approval.
Have a motion and a second by Fred. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. Charles, thank you. Great. Agenda item 5D is a report on the 60 by 30 text communications plan. Kelly Carper-Polden, Assistant Director of Communications, will present the proposed 60 by 30 text communications plan brand campaign. And once again, this one we will not have to vote on. It's for information only. So, Kelly, welcome. Now I'll turn it to you.
2 months ago today that the board, approved 60 by 30 text. Doesn't seem possible. It's already been 2 months. So this morning, I'll talk about what we've done to date and what we plan to do as far as communicating the plan to stakeholders. As I mentioned yesterday, 60 by 30 text is now our universe. It's what we will live and breathe for the next 15 years. And we want 60 by 30 text to be top of mind, as much so as closing the gaps had become over the last 15 years. Our goal is to craft a strategic home run. I say a grand slam based on what Dr. Tischer was saying yesterday, that successfully communicates the plan, the goals, and the coordinating board itself. Oops. Not advancing. There we go. So a brand is a perception. It's the experience that we want our stakeholders to have, and we want it to be a positive experience throughout the next 15 years. Our task is to create opportunities that connect with stakeholders and successfully communicate 60 by 30 text and its goals. We'll work with stakeholders across Texas using a variety of activities, venues, and vehicles to communicate the strategic plan. And internally, 60 by 30 text becomes the agency's institutional identity, our true north, because everything that we do should support 60 by 30 text. One of the important factors is the successful image and updating our identity so that it conveys the essence of the plan. With the adoption of 60 by 30 text, it's our opportunity to update our overall message and have a consistent image. So the 60 by 30 text logo now becomes, this will work. You might want to go ahead and advance. The 60 by 30 text logo now becomes the agency logo, and the star and mortarboard, what I call Starman, will go away. So prior to the plan's approval, the coordinating board sought input from more than 5,800 stakeholders across Texas, and now the next 2 years will be critical to ensure that 60 by 30 text is embraced statewide prior to the next legislative session. During this time, it's crucial to present a compelling case to achieve 60 by 30 text and make the statement that it's critical to the social and economic benefit, the future of Texas. These efforts are internal as well as external, and as you see by the PowerPoints that have been used, also by the board newsletter, we have started to incorporate the 60 by 30 text goal in everything that we present internally and externally, and that will include, from going forth, the reports and documents that the agency puts out. So we've developed a statewide communications plan with the aim of also attracting national attention, again, as Closing the Gaps had done. We requested funding for the communications plan from the Lumina Foundation, and we hope to hear later this fall if we get the funding so that we can move forward with some of the things that you see on the screen. So we will launch and sustain this ambitious student-focused goal with the engagement of multiple stakeholders using the variety of communications vehicles and venues. We want to take advantage of every opportunity possible. As I mentioned yesterday, last week, the Texas Association of Business held a conference here in Austin, and their conference was named 60 by 30 Tex. At that conference, 2 of the 3 panels focused and highlighted 60 by 30 Tex, and there was a lot of good information. There wasn't anything negative. There were discussions about the challenges because this is an ambitious goal, but it was a great third-party endorsement of the plan. In addition, next month, the Texas Trib Fest will give us the opportunity to talk more about the 60 by 30 Tex plan, and in November, the Austin Chamber of Commerce is having an educational event, and I'm working with staff, and hopefully, Bobby, you will help me, to get 60 by 30 Tex on the agenda. Also, the day after the board approved the plan, I put together a proposal and submitted it to the South by Southwest EDU conference. We're hoping to hear whether that 60 by 30 Tex panel will be approved and will be part of the conference March 7th through the 10th next year. This quote shows some of the enthusiasm about the plan, the fact that the coordinating board has hit a home run. That says a lot, and this was part of an op-ed piece that continues to run in publications across Texas and highly supports 60 by 30 Tex and what it will mean, especially to the business community in Texas. We've also had more than 25 media stories in the last 2 months, and we haven't even officially launched our plan. In addition, during a recent trip to Washington, Commissioner Paredes met with the Texas federal delegation and got an overwhelming response. In fact, some of the staff have asked for talking points that they can now incorporate into their presentations. So again, that's third-party endorsement of our plan. So to close, we want to promote 60 by 30 Tex. We want to continue to hit home runs, and we welcome your input, guidance, and most especially your participation as we give presentations, do media interviews, and other activities across the state. Be happy to answer any questions or comments.
Questions? Kelly, the request to the Lumina Foundation, that was for how much is that request?
We asked for $150,000 per year over 2 years.
And so what's the backup plan? Or, you know, when would we hear? And if we don't get the right answer, then what?
We hope to hear later this fall. I don't know exactly when because this was an ad hoc request. It isn't an official grant. So there isn't a date that we will get, but we just hope for the fall. If we do not get that, then we would want to go to other possible funding sources. I do know that with Closing the Gaps, we did not have funding designated for communicating the plan, and we made great efforts. David was here, and he can speak to that, but we didn't have dedicated funds. So we would do everything that we could do without funding, but we're hopeful that we would get the funding.
I just wanted to add that the commissioner and I have had discussions with Gates as well, and there seems to be interest on their part. So we actually have two potential sources of funding for this.
And I know you've heard from the board, I mean, but the opportunity here is one that we just can't afford to miss. And
Right.
so, from my mind, this is just a tremendous priority, and that communications of what this plan is, we've got to figure out how to make sure that we invest to get that message out there, because that's what's going to pay dividends, because the more people that know, the higher the probability of success. I really, really am convinced of that.
I agree, and we do have a window of opportunity. I think the time between now and the next legislative session really is our window of opportunity, and we need to do everything that we can during that period of time from the grassroots up.
Commissioner?
We have several proposals to support the marketing campaign before several foundations. In addition, there's some things that we just do as a matter of course that will help get the word out about the plan. For example, the commissioners of the Texas Workforce Commission and TEA, Michael Williams and Andres Alcantar, and I are going to resume our regional visits, and we are going to talk about the strategic plan. I make regular presentations to boards of regents, and I think we've already done, as you know, the Texas A&M board. We have the UT board coming up, Texas Tech and the University of Houston this year, and some others in the spring. I'm visiting some community colleges, and we will have some conversations with some of their board members as well. So even without the grant, and I'm very confident that we will get funding for the marketing plan, we still have ways to get the word out broadly. So, and we are working on that very aggressively.
Yes, and we will take advantage of every opportunity that comes along.
Have we thought of, to me, this is also the type of public service announcement opportunity and material. Have we thought about that kind of public relations outreach to local media as it relates particularly to broadcast, be it TV or radio? I know they have different things that they support, and have we thought about how do we present this to them as one of those endeavors?
Yes, we can create a public service campaign and focus especially on things like marketable skills and student debt. Those will grab attention right away. Another thing that I've learned is that at the Capitol, legislators have an opportunity to create videos, and if we can work with legislators to create a public service announcement that then can be in their district, that's a win-win situation for us. So again, it's those types of things. We're looking at every opportunity possible because this really is critical to the future of Texas.
Great.
And now's the time.
Good. Any other questions? Laura?
Well, I think this is very exciting. And one of the things that we talked about yesterday was all of us, each one of us in our own areas, delivering the message, taking it and really talking to our chambers and talking to our organizations and doing that, because in our communities, in our areas where we are active, they hopefully know us and trust us, and I think that we can really deliver a good message, all of us. And that was something that we talked about, and I'm very excited about. So I think.
And in the plan, we do have a list of what we call critical audiences, stakeholders, and that list will grow. And that's where you will definitely play a major role as far as helping us communicate to all of those stakeholders.
Absolutely.
Kelly, mention the quarterly calls we have with editorial boards and higher ed reporters.
Yes. Last year, we started having a quarterly editorial board conference call where the commissioner will talk about key items each quarter, and we've had great success with reporters, higher education reporters, business reporters from across the state who will call in and take the opportunity to hear what the commissioner has to say, and then we have a question and answer session. And we really have gotten some positive media stories from that, and it helps with that, the media relations, reaching out and providing information, whether the reporter does a story the day after or not. It helps kind of plant some seeds as far as future stories or knowing that the coordinating board is a resource.
Kelly, thank you very much. And once again, let us know how we can help. Agenda item 5E is a report on data highlight, 8th grade cohort. Julie Eklund, Interim Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning and Funding, will present highlights from this new analysis of the 8th grade cohort data. This item is for information only. Julie, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Polden has just outlined our ambitious plan for promoting the 60 by 30 text to external stakeholders, but we also have a lot of work ahead internally to further develop our understanding of the data around the new goals and targets, and of course to track those goals and targets. This presentation will, I hope, be the first in a series of data highlights that I will bring to you to share our data analysis work and its possible implications for our 60 by 30 text plan. The data I'm sharing today highlights our 8th grade cohort. The coordinating board has tracked cohorts of public school 8th graders since 1998, and this information has helped us to understand and track improvements in our K-12 through higher education pipeline. So this is our key pipeline data that we work with. Today I will share some data that show more about what many would say are surprisingly low certificate completion levels for cohort participants, and the data also indicate considerable differences by economic status for students, both in terms of progress through the pipeline and for those who do complete, the patterns of completion. So this slide just highlights some of the information I'm going to be sharing with you today in more detail. I wanted to talk a little bit about how we track data before I move into the 8th grade cohort, because there are several different ways that we look at student progress at the coordinating board. Some of the data we look at is cohort-based, and this is where we have a defined group that we track over time, such as the 8th grade cohort. But the more maybe traditional cohort-based data that people are used to hearing about is graduation rate data. So for our graduation rates, we look at our first-time, full-time entering students, and we track them for 4, 5, 6, sometimes 10 years through the system. So our 4-year graduation rate, 6-year cohort is something you're used to hearing about, where we have 60.5% right now, which has been real progress of our public university students who are graduating in 6 years. But we also track other types of cohorts. We look at persistence rates by cohorts. We look at transfer rates, students who transfer, and how those cohorts do as they move forward. We also look at data in a way that I like to refer to it as snapshot data. So a good example of data where we're just looking at a point in time and looking at counts would be our completion data in our 60 by 30 text plan, where we're looking to see a certain number of students in a given year who are completing a degree or certificate. So there's many ways that we look at data. Today we're going to be focusing on this 8th grade cohort moving through time. So we had 325,000 8th graders who began 8th grade in the fall of 2003. We tracked them for 11 years. So there were 100%, of course, who started in that cohort. And over time, we can see what happens to that as they move through the pipeline. 94% of those students enrolled in 9th grade. 69% of them graduated from high school. 53% enrolled in higher education in Texas, and just 20% had earned a degree or certificate by 2014. Now, that 20% is an improvement since we started tracking these 8th grade cohorts in '98, when we had about 18%. But we still have a long way to go in terms of these cohorts. I will also mention, which is kind of interesting in this cohort, that we do see students who are with us in our Texas public system in 8th grade. We don't find them graduating from high school, but then we see them enrolling in higher education in Texas. In fact, we had about 17,000 students in the cohort who did enroll again. So that might be students who left to go to a private high school in Texas or homeschool. Yes?
Julie, do you track students that may have left the state?
If a student leaves the state and does not come back in, they are not they are not included in the cohort, right? They're just included.
Oh, you take them out
Yes.
altogether?
They are in 8th grade.
Okay.
In the 8th grade cohort, and they are included all along as in the denominator, and then if they show up again as they move through, we include them.
So if they go to Alaska and come back, then we pick them up again.
Okay.
Right.
But if they go to Alaska and never come back, they adversely affect the percentage.
Sure.
Correct.
Yes.
And that's kind of frustrating because, it doesn't say one thing.
Doesn't mean we failed.
Right, that's what I'm getting at, because you look at it and you go, oh, uh-oh, but those that go away and don't come back, that's not a reflection on anything that's happening within the state. And I don't know how to account for that if it's a significant number. And also, when they go to private school or homeschool, I mean, that's not a reflection. I mean, that's a positive.
And that's why Julie mentioned that we found 17,000.
That's
that
a
we
lot.
assume either, as she said, that went to private high school, were homeschooled. They may have left the state and come back. And it's also unfortunate that a few of these students may have died as well. I mean, we have a relatively small number, too many who die as well, and we can't pick up. But we can't pick up for other states.
Study, though.
That's right.
You have to include those numbers.
Right.
By the way, just for basis of comparison, back a slide again right there. No, the next one. Sorry.
This one right here.
Yeah, the 53% enrolled in higher education in Texas. By comparison, in the states that send the largest percentage of high school graduates to college, the numbers are around 65, 67%. They send almost 2/3 of their high school graduates to college. So we are way behind the leading states in that percentage.
And what I do want to add is, as you look at this cohort, you can look at it at different points in time. And, I mentioned our graduation rate for our students who are first-time, full-time students. Well, for our students who who were in the cohort, who graduated from a Texas high school and enrolled in a 4-year university, we have a 59, almost 60% graduation rate for them. So as those who are at that point in the cohort where they're graduating and enrolling in higher ed and moving through, it looks very similar. But this is just a different type of way to look at students. So we have some understanding of what's happening through the pipeline starting in 8th grade. And especially it's a nice way to be able to look at those students who are in our K-12 system from that early, because we have a lot of students who come in later.
I have a question.
Yes.
Back to that slide. Are the students that go to college out of state included in the higher education factor, or are they also dropped if they go to
No, they're not,
state?
because we don't have that information.
Okay.
We've had it in the past, and so we have some understanding about what those percentages are, and of those who enroll, about 10% enroll out of state.
What do we
Is there
do?
any way you can keep track of those students who graduate from beside Texas somewhere else?
No, we are able to keep track of those who graduate from Texas institutions, public and private, but we don't have the out-of-state information.
And in context, it may be useful to know that there are only a handful of states that can give you this much data at all. So we're missing some clear elements or some efforts underway nationally to perhaps connect to other federal records so states can get some of that movement across states. But right now, we've sort of maxed out what's possible.
And this is, and we recognize this is a serious deficiency, but there are federal data that show that Texas students leave the state to go to college in far smaller numbers than that of most states. I think we're among the 5 states that send the lowest percentage of high school graduates to school out of state. So that the impact would not be nearly as great in Texas as in other places, states like New Jersey and Connecticut and New York that send 25 30% of their high school graduates out of state. That
And
doesn't
just-
happen in Texas.
Just geographically, some of
Yeah.
those students, it would be like somebody in Dallas going to school in Houston or in Austin would be the same as leaving the state,
Yeah.
just from a mileage standpoint.
Okay, in terms of our degree and award completion for those students, we've highlighted these statewide breakouts in our most recent Higher Education Almanac, and as you can see, the certificate completion rate is quite low for our 8th grade cohort. Of our 100% who start in 8th grade, only 1% earn a certificate only, and that jumps up to about 2% if they earn a certificate and an additional degree.
And just to make a point, we have not had this particular data in our previous cohort. So that's one reason we wanted you to hear it today, because we did break it down by degree type.
Do we
Yes,
know do we know the percentage that transferred without receiving an associate's degree, transferred from a two-year institution to a university?
I believe, but I don't have that with me, so I will get that.
Julie, I had a question.
Sure.
In terms of the previous cohorts that David just mentioned, those that maybe go off to work, that 53% could be a difference that maybe they may be early to tell, but do they come back, maybe and try to get an associate's or a bachelor's degree?
Yes,
later?
in fact, I'm going to share a little bit of data later about our average age for certificate degree
Great.
completers, and we see that a lot of students come in later as adults to earn certificates. And in fact, as Dr. Gardner was mentioning, it's new for us to be looking at this data by degree completion, and I think we had a requester who saw the data perhaps in the almanac, but asked us could we provide a little more detail about this about the types of degrees and certificates that students were completing and what those students look like demographically. And because that's also very important for us in terms of our 60 by 30 text goal, we were happy to go ahead and do a deeper dive into the data to look at it in terms of who is actually completing the various types of degrees or certificates. It's important for the plan because we do have a target to increase our economically disadvantaged students, and we have one to increase the percent of students who are enrolling directly from high school to college. So I think it's important to look at this cohort and see what those students are doing and how they're enrolling. So what this slide shows is that our economically disadvantaged students are in the 8th grade cohort are much less likely to complete in those 6 years from high school to graduation until they're through, or from the 11 years from when they're in 8th grade onward. In the middle slide in red, you'll see that of those who are economically disadvantaged, who are almost half the cohort for this cohort, and we use the free and reduced lunch status to determine the economic disadvantage, only 10% of those students earned a degree or certificate during the time that we tracked them versus 30% of those students who were not disadvantaged. And if we look at this data by type, which is, again, this is the new information we've been looking at, you can see that of the economically disadvantaged 8th graders, 1% earned a certificate, 3% an associate, and 6% a bachelor's degree. Those who are not economically disadvantaged, the pattern looks a little bit different, with 2% a certificate being the highest, 4% an associate, and 24% earning a bachelor's. So if you lay this out on a graph, you really can see a difference in terms of that bachelor's degree completion, and if you look at the associate and certificate completion, it's more similar for both populations. So we wanted to look at that a little bit more closely. What we decided to look at when we saw this data is the students who were earning multiple degrees on their way to earning a bachelor's degree, because we saw those patterns. And up to now, what I've shown you is just highest degree completed, but we went ahead and looked at, for those students who earned a bachelor's, what percent from the two groups we're looking at earned a certificate and or an associate on the way to that bachelor's, and we saw that students who are economically disadvantaged were much more likely to earn a certificate and associate as they worked towards the bachelor's degree than those who weren't. And I think when people talk about a certificate or associate being an endpoint, I think this is helpful to see that for those economically disadvantaged students, for many of them, it was a degree that they earned or a certificate they earned along the way towards a bachelor's degree. So the pattern is definitely different here for our economically disadvantaged students. And in terms of the associate degree, we also see more economically disadvantaged students in the cohort earning an associate first before they earn the bachelor's. So I think it's helpful to know that we do have different patterns for that population that we're trying to understand more about. We also have a target in the plan to increase completion rates for males and also for African American and Hispanic students. When we looked at the data for the economically disadvantaged students, the race and ethnicity didn't make much difference except for our other category, which is mostly Asian students. So 8% of our white and Hispanic males in the cohort were completing in that 11-year span, 6% of our African American males, and 25% in the other group. And when we looked at this, led us to say, well, let's look at the completions for female students, and they were very similar at 11% African American, 12% white, and 13% Hispanic in terms of the completers versus 35% of women who were in the other category. So it's interesting to look at, and as you can also see for certificate students, the Hispanic and white males looked very similar in terms of earning that certificate credential. So I think looking at this data by economic disadvantage, again, we see some patterns that I think will be useful as we try to improve our completion rates. And finally, this last slide is what I mentioned earlier. What often happens, or I guess it's the second to last slide, what often happens when we are in data detective mode here at the coordinating board, we see things that make us ask additional questions. And as we were looking at this data, we asked the exact same question that you did, Mr. Farias. We said, well, is there something different about students earning certificates where they're not enrolling right from high school and we're more likely to see them later? So we broke out data overall for our degree and certificate completion by age and by age ranges. And here you'll see we looked at, on the chart, students who are 24 years old and under, and basically in the 8th grade cohort, you're tracked through the time that you're 24. And you can see for everyone, bachelor's degree completion is much more common for that younger age population, and our older students we see more and more certificate completion for those students. Average age is 31 for earning a certificate, if that's the first the degree that you're earning. It's 28 for associates and 26 for students earning bachelor's degrees. So here are the takeaways I wanted to bring to you that we saw in this data. There's probably a lot more, but we thought it was useful to take this deeper dive. We saw that the 8th grade students who do complete are much more likely to earn a bachelor's degree. And I think these younger degree earners have more time to build careers and reach financial goals. So I think we want to try to work harder in getting our students to attend college right from high school or soon thereafter. Our economically disadvantaged students are more likely to build on other degrees. We need a more developed understanding of the leaks in the pipeline to understand those students who aren't continuing. We see a lot of room for growth for these younger students in certificate and associate completion. I think if we can get some students in whose pathway is to earn a certificate, that's where they want to be, they might be more likely after they come in to earn a bachelor's, but also if they earn a credential at a younger age, they'll have more potential to earn a living wage for a longer portion of their career. And I think that's important. We saw some changes in HB 5 to our graduation options for students, and it'll be interesting to see if that changes our patterns of certificate completions, if we now start to see more students who are earning certificates. So I also think that's going to be an important thing for us to look at.
Got a question, please. In your previous slide, you said non-economically disadvantaged student, 66% enter the college and only 30% graduate. Did you do a study why they don't complete at much higher rate than only less than 50%?
We have looked a lot at student persistence through higher education. We lose a lot of students. We have a lot of students who enroll who don't complete. We know that readiness, whether a student has met readiness standards and they're prepared for college level work when they come in, we know that students who are ready are much more likely to complete in that 6-year span. We've also spent a lot of time trying to understand the patterns of completion. We see some students who are with us for a semester and don't continue. We see some students who complete a lot of semester credit hours, and I know we've started to look at things like, well, does financial aid make a difference in terms of making sure those students who are almost there do complete? We also know that we have some students who take more than 6 years to complete a degree or certificate. We have students who are part-time, so we see some part-time patterns, though the majority of students who do complete a bachelor's do it within 6 years. Yes?
Do you also publish any salary data for graduates after they get out in different fields?
Yes, we do.
And to the students that incentivize them to complete their degrees?
Yes, our Texas Cruise website, which we developed in conjunction with the Texas Workforce Commission, gives detailed data about student salaries at 1, 3, 5, 8, and 10 years, I think, from college graduation, and it includes the information by field. So I think that's very useful for students, and we need to work on making sure they get that information.
In fact, it gives that data for each institution, so it's not just a statewide average, but it could be UH Victoria versus UH Clear Lake in the same field, or UT Austin for every community college. So every specific certificate or degree designation, we have that down to the individual school.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just want to commend you and the group and the staff, Raymond, on this information. I think this is important information. We need to know where we're at, where we need to go, and this is good, solid data to know, what's happening and where we need to do some work.
Thank you. Yes.
Great. Thank you. We now move to item 5F, which is a report on activities of the Competency-Based Education CBE Work Group. Judith Sebesta, Director of Innovation, will provide a brief overview of the activities of the group. And this item is for information only. So, Judith, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having me, for the record. I'd like to say at the outset what a privilege it is to be working with Texas institutions of higher education that are doing such highly innovative work to support our students' success. Now, I will be talking about the Competency-Based Education Work Group, but I thought I would give a little context for their activities first. Competency-based education is an alternative to the credit hour-based system of credentialing. I would argue it has 3 key components. Student progress is measured based on demonstration of mastery of competencies. Mastery is measured through assessments and/or through application of credit for prior learning. And instruction is available to support learning and mastery of competencies when needed. I think it's important to note as well that accredited CBE programs must ensure that students have access to qualified faculty and that regular and substantive interaction between faculty and student initiated by faculty occurs. Also, I think a key difference between competency-based education and what we might refer to as traditional education is that in traditional education, time is fixed and learning variable. In competency-based education, learning is fixed and time variable. Competency-based education is one very effective strategy to help fulfill all 4 goals of our new strategic plan for higher education in Texas, including 60 by 30, completion, marketable skills, and student debt. Competency-based education is mentioned specifically as a strategy to serve adult and/or non-traditional student populations under both the 60 by 30 and the completion goals. Competency-based education programs can offer effective degree completion pathways, particularly for adult students and others, via things like flexibility of location, workforce alignment, accelerated time to degree, self-paced or personalized learning, and for many students, affordability. Competency-based education is not new. But in Texas, just to give you a sense of what's been going on, it's had a presence in Texas since at least 2011, with the founding of WGU Texas, which offers only competency-based education degrees. The Texas Affordable Baccalaureate Program was developed jointly by the Coordinating Board, South Texas College, and Texas A&M University Commerce starting in 2011 to be the first competency-based education program at the bachelor's level offered by public institutions in the state of Texas. They began instruction in January of 2014 and graduated their first class of students just recently in May of 2015. Also, the Institute for Competency-Based Education was recently founded by Texas A&M University Commerce with a nearly $1.5 million allocation from the legislature. And they have, They have a twofold mission, and that is to conduct research on competency-based education outcomes, which are sorely needed as we move forward, and to assist institutions in Texas with the development of CBE programs. And then also, you might note that the UT system has begun a pilot of CBE bachelor programs with one in biomedical sciences at UT RGV just this month. They also have announced that CBE programs will be delivered at most or all institutions by 2017 and 2018. And those are in development right now. And then finally, our foundation, the College for All Texans Foundation, is identifying external support for the development of 8 additional Texas Affordable Baccalaureate programs across the state. So I hope this is becoming clear that competency-based education is growing throughout Texas, and you could even argue beyond. We now have at least, and I would say at least, and this seems to be growing every day, 22 Texas institutions, approximately, to my knowledge, 16 public and 6 independent, that have implemented, are developing, or are interested in developing competency-based education programs. This map here gives you an indication of where these institutions are, but it's not meant to be comprehensive. As I said, just about every day I'm learning about new institutions that are interested in developing competency-based education programs. I think also striking is the fact that the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning recently cited that over 600 institutions nationwide are developing CBE programs. So that brings me to the development of our Texas CBE work group. In response to this growing interest in CBE, in May 2015, the Coordinating Board created a very informal, but I think crucial network of institutions to share activities, ideas, and resources across institutions. Currently, we have 32 participants from all of the institutions on this map, both public and independent. The group holds monthly conference calls, and we also, between the calls, communicate via a Yammer social site. And we do things like, our activities include things like, as I mentioned, information and resource sharing, things like tech vendor reviews, conference debriefings, articles and reports on CBE that seem to be coming out daily, all the time, hourly almost, I would say. It's hard to keep track. We've also invited guest speakers to speak to us on our monthly calls. Dr. Sally Johnstone, who serves as VP for Academic Advancement at Western Governors University, spoke at our first one. Dr. George Siemens, the Executive Director of the Link Lab at UTA, also spoke at one of our calls. And our own Dr. Rex Peebles, the Assistant Commissioner for Academic Quality and Workforce, spoke with us as well on our recent call. We also engage in networking with each other, but also our members act as liaisons to other key organizations like the National Competency-Based Education Network, the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, the American Council on Education, the WICHE, Cooperative for Educational Technology, and other organizations that focus on competency-based education. We engage in considerable collaboration together. A good example of this is that we have are working to develop an intensive workshop or incubator, I think you could call it, to assist Texas institutions in creating CBE programs of their own. And then finally, last but probably not least, the work group helps facilitate the building and maintenance of a very unofficial, I would say, inventory of CBE programs across the state. Anyone, I would like to note in closing, can join this very informal CBE work group. So I invite anyone any of you or anyone who is listening in to contact me if they're interested in joining the group. I welcome questions.
Excuse me, I've got a question. Hey, pardon my ignorance. What's the difference between competency-based education and regular education?
Well, it is a not uncommon question, I would say, but a big difference is, let me come back to that slide that I had just so I have this visual. This is one that people keep talking about, is that in traditional education, time is fixed. A semester credit hours, a semester length, what have you. And learning is variable. Some of the students may master all of the material, but I think we all know that in spite of faculty best efforts, and I was a faculty member for many years, that some of the students can pass the class without actually having mastered all of the material. Competency-based education is designed so that that is virtually impossible. Competencies and modules are stacked on one another, and you cannot move along until you have demonstrated mastery of those competencies. So that's why I mentioned that learning is fixed, but time may be variable. Many of these are self-paced. A student may be able to master those competencies in a very compacted amount of time, less time than a semester, 7 weeks, possibly. So those are a couple of the really big differences between the two, I would say. And many of our programs, including our Texas Affordable Baccalaureate program, is setting a level of mastery at 80% or higher, whereas you can pass a traditional course at 60% or higher. So usually the level of competency, mastery, there are different terms for that, by the way. Proficiency, capability are ones that I hear. You really, in order to graduate from these programs, your level of mastery is going to be quite a bit higher.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Very interesting.
It's a very good question. Very good question.
Since time is variable, is there any sort of time limit, like where it expires?
There is, actually. I mean, the fact of the matter is that our institutions still need to do their work and their jobs, and that we really do kind of need time frames for things. Now, it can vary. The Texas Affordable Baccalaureate program runs in almost continuous 7-week terms, but they are 7-week terms, and you need to complete the modules or the competencies that you've started in that time. You do have a chance to redo them, but only pretty much just right at the start of the next term. So yes, we basically do have terms, but they can be a lot quicker than your regular semester.
My question is, Judith, is you mentioned UTRGV. That's where I'm from. Now, do particular institutions apply, obviously, to the coordinating board for approval, and so they pretty much present their plans in terms of being competency-based?
That's an excellent question. Actually, they do not. Only if it is a new degree program, and then they would go through the same process that they would go through for any new degree program. But we currently do not have a process in place for institutions to gain approval specifically for competency-based education delivery.
So are we looking at doing that, or how does?
Yeah, that's
what do
pretty
we do
much
here?
where I'm getting at. Yeah. Who's kind of like leading the train there?
That's a good question. I might let Dr. Gardner take that one, or Dr.
Let me
Eklund.
say, leading the train, at least in terms of PhD programs, which we haven't talked about today, the commissioner has pushed very strongly for the inclusion of competency-based efforts in those programs, and so that is the case. There are many programs, thousands and thousands of programs that are in place that have been approved for many years, and they can change, in some ways, their delivery of those without our approval. I think one thing you haven't mentioned is some of the issues surrounding competency-based, related to financial aid, related to the regional accrediting bodies that everyone's working around right now, but we're not able to take full advantage of competency-based until these are clarified.
It is true, and they're highly complicated issues. Right now, the majority of programs in the country, and all of our programs in Texas, are what I would call mapping back to the semester credit hour. So they create a curricula that is comprised of a variety of competencies, but then they map them back to, a 120-hour bachelor's degree. How many competencies would be, how many semester credit hours? And therefore, they're able right now to operate under our current method of operating for both financial aid and for state funding. But it's probably worth mentioning that the Department of Education has recently approved a number of what they're calling experimental sites. And these institutions have gained approval to not map back to the credit hour and to do what they're terming is direct assessment, which there is no, what Christina had mentioned before, there is no kind of mapping back to a certain time limit. It's all about the direct assessment of those competencies, not seat time, if that makes sense. We have 2 community colleges in Texas right now that are experimental sites, and so we'll see what happens with that. Austin Community College and Dallas Community College District. They got approval a while back, but it's taken the Department of Education several years to get the process in place, to get guidelines out. They actually just yesterday released the very extensive guidelines for these experimental sites, and we will see what happens.
Okay. There are also, we've learned some technical issues in terms of software at the institution needing to be adjusted to account for competency-based education completions, which were not built into the typical systems.
Right.
That's definitely something that schools can fix, but it does take some effort to address that.
Effort and expense often, and expense.
Getting back to the issue of graduate education, it seems to me that graduate education, particularly at the doctoral level and most particularly in professional fields, lends itself very nicely to competency-based education. As you know, doctoral education, a primary component of doctoral education is qualifying exams, and those are a perfect opportunity to actually measure competency, so that it seems to us that schools, universities can build on these qualifying exams or these comprehensive exams to build in measures of competency, so that students will advance not on the basis of accumulated hours, but rather on the demonstration of competency. And in professional fields, it should be relatively easy to do that. We recently had some conversations with some institutions where they were in their first proposals to us about adopting or putting into place new doctoral programs. We said, why don't you simply measure competencies instead of requiring up to 90 hours of coursework beyond the bachelor's or the master's degree? And people who've been working as assistant superintendents or principals for many, many years, and they want that EDD so they can qualify for superintendencies, for example, that it should be frequently the case that students in these programs could advance much more quickly because they have acquired competency through professional experience. And we think that's a good place to start. I'm going to College Station tomorrow to talk to graduate deans about precisely this issue.
I've got a question. Is it possible to mix this competency education with regular, especially if somebody is going for engineering? They should be very competent in math, and they can have competent classes in math and a few other classes, and then take regulars.
Absolutely it is. And there are hybrid programs out there where they are doing a combination of both the traditional and the competency-based education. The Department of Education's Experimental Sites Initiative that I mentioned actually has a component of that is where institutions can do hybrid programs just like you're talking about. So then some would argue you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, because then the dropout rate in engineering will be a lot less than, if you're really competent in math and physics and few sciences.
Laura?
Well, your enthusiasm is contagious.
Oh, no.
Excellent. I mean, you had my attention immediately.
Thank you.
So thank you.
That's very kind.
Thank you for that. Maybe
my job,
I missed it, but did you talk on this slide about tracking?
Yeah, well, I did not in much detail. Really, I have to say, all that involves basically is that I keep a list within my Yammer site for the work group. I keep a list that is an interactive document, And I started it, but any institution who's involved in the work group can add to it and add information about the work they're doing, the degrees they're planning and implementing. So that's basically the list of how we're tracking the institutions.
So I think that would be very important, the tracking part of
And
it.
something that I think it's starting to get to a critical mass where I think we might want to talk about how we can share that. Right now, it really is housed within this Yammer group that in which you have to have an invitation to join. But we might talk about how we can share that information. It's constantly changing, again, so we also have to make sure we can update it very quickly and in real time. But I think it's crucial. That competency-based education network that I mentioned, that's a national network, they're engaged in this right now as well, and it's not easy. They gave that number of 600, but even they themselves admit they think there's more out there. Those are just the ones they've been able to confirm. And I would say the same thing about my work group and the institutions that I know about.
And I do want to mention, we are also beginning to collect data in our regular data collection process. We have a couple of fields where schools are doing this. We ask them to report their students in competency-based hours.
Yes, particularly now that we are beginning to have students who are graduating from these programs as of May 2015. And they have plans to scale up, and to scale up considerably to meet the needs of particularly our working adult students who have some college but no degree.
Christina?
I just wanted to commend, this is a really exciting idea. I can't count how many classes I sat through, and I'm like, okay, I sat through it and I wouldn't be able to apply it. So I think this is a great shift to focus more on like what competencies you're getting rather than you sat through the class and somehow passed the test.
I appreciate that.
You know, Judith, to me, all of this kind of information just helps us align with the strategic plan and to hit the goals. This is another one of the processes that I think is going to be absolutely critical to that achievement. And I know the commissioners talked about CBE for several years, and I know the more I hear about it, the more interested I am in trying to make sure that we push that forward, because I just think this, David, you touched on it earlier. I mean, higher ed is drastically changing, and how do we make sure that we adapt and change in order to meet those numbers that we've got for the next 15 years? It's going to take this kind of innovation, and I just want to make sure, Julie, that that we stay completely plugged in with what Judith and her team are doing on an ongoing, consistent basis, because to me, this really helps us keep our eye on the ball of what the type of innovation that's necessary to hit those goals. So I applaud the work that the group's doing, and I really want to make sure that we're kept completely apprised of the progress and the process that's taken place.
We'll do that, and we'll be sure to bring Judith back again to update you.
Yes.
I'd be happy to.
Great. Thank you. Great. All right. Thank you all very much. Okay. Agenda item 5G is a report on studies required by the 84th Texas Legislature. Julie Eklund, Interim Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning and Funding, will provide information on the studies, and Rex Peoples, the Assistant Commissioner for Academic Quality and Workforce, Kristen Kramer, Deputy Assistant Commissioner for College Readiness and Success, and Chad Pulls, Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Student Financial Aid Programs, are available for questions. Once again, this is an information-only item. So, Julie, I'll turn it over to you and the team.
Thank you. And we're going to keep this brief in the interest of time, but we just wanted to give you an overview of some of the large studies that were required by the legislature during this last session. And these particular studies will require collaborative efforts across divisions in the agency. And those are the kind of studies I particularly like, because it's wonderful to get that cross-pollination. So that we're going to talk about for today. I'll go through all of them, and then we can take questions at the end, if that's okay. And I've just asked Dr. Peebles and Dr. Pulls to be here in case you have specific questions that I'm unable to answer. So the first one came as a result of House Bill 1992, and this is a study of students who score on an advanced placement exam with a 3, 4, or 5, and to track those students in terms of their performance in higher education. HB 1992 now says that institutions may not require an AP score higher than 3 in terms of allowing credit unless there's evidence-based justification provided by a chief academic officer that a higher score should be required in order to give students credit and have them move into the next class. This becomes effective in fall 2016, and I think appropriately the legislature affiliated a study along with this change so that we at the CB are responsible for conducting a two-part study to look at how students perform, those students who do get credit for AP exams, how they perform as they move forward in higher education. We have a progress report that's going to be due to the legislature in January of 2017, and then we have a final report on our study results along with some recommendations due on January 1st in 2019. So we're going to go ahead and make comparison of students who complete the course and move forward versus students who receive credit for a course with a 3, 4, or 5, and we're asked to look at retention and graduation rates for those students in the AP group versus the non-AP group. And we have the authority to collect data related to this two-part study. The next one is Senate Bill 37. There was also, and that's Senator Zaffarini's bill, there was also a companion bill from NASHAT, and this is to study students with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are referred to as IDD students. We're required to collect and maintain data relating to the participation of IDD students in higher education. We are to conduct an ongoing study of that data, and that includes admissions, graduation, and professional licensing data. And the bill also requires us to study recruitment, what institutions are doing to recruit students with IDD, and report back to the legislature on that in November of even years. This is a new population for us to be studying, and so we're trying to get some assistance with this from some outside experts. We're going to be bringing together a group of folks from the field who understand this population. We met with Senator Zaffarini's staff to get an understanding of the intent behind this bill and what they think would be appropriate, and I think they were very supportive of us bringing this group in as we move forward. We will, of course, then need to be working with our institutions on the additional data collection that will be necessary. The statute does allow, or does talk specifically about meeting FERPA and HIPAA requirements for this population. So again, this will be new. I would imagine that this coming March, we'll probably be bringing you some rules related to data collection so that we are able to conduct this ongoing study of these populations. Okay, the next one comes from Senate Bill 1776, and this relates to studying students who have completed college preparatory courses when they're in high school. And these are the courses under House Bill 5 that high schools and community colleges develop together, and basically that bill that went through the last in the 83rd session says that students who are successful in these college preparatory courses are exempt from TSI for a certain period of time, so they can enter those college-level courses even if they haven't met the testing standards for TSI. And I think this is a very good study because it's very important for us, I think, to understand if these courses are able to get those students ready and prepared to be successful in those college-level courses. So we're going to be going ahead and looking at the students' performance in those first college-level courses who have been exempt from TSI through this statute, and then we are required to, once we do the study, to pass information on to the partnering high schools and IHEs about how their students have performed who participated in these courses, as well as to the governor and the House, et cetera. So that will be a study that we'll be very involved in soon. And the final one is from Senate Bill 947, and this is a work study feasibility or a work-study feasibility study. And this focuses on identifying 4 items in relation to off-campus opportunities through the Texas College Work-Study Program. One is to be looking at best practices for developing partnerships with off-campus employers, because I think there's a real interest in understanding that better. And another focus is careers or industries that are best suited for work-study partnerships, so identifying those. Also identifying the barriers faced by junior colleges, by our public community colleges and technical colleges in offering work-study partnerships. What are those challenges going to be, or what are they now? And also wanted to mention that this study recognizes that our junior colleges, our 2-year institutions, are well positioned to participate in a pilot study. So we'll probably see something going on along those lines. So that's the overview. If you have any questions about these studies, you will, of course, because most of these it's legislatively required that they come to the board, so you will see rules and you will see study results coming to you over the next several years, and we wanted you to just be aware that these were happening.
Members, any questions? Well, they are, and I look forward to the information that comes from them, because once again, you look at a lot of the things that you're outlining there, and it's a big factor on are we going to be successful or not with the strategic plan. And so, once again, I think that everything that we do aligning with that and that information will be very, very valuable to know if we're on the right track or not. So
Absolutely.
look forward to the information and the results and the data. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Okay, agenda item 5H is a report on facilities projects that were submitted to the coordinating board. Julie Eklund, Interim Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning and Funding, will be available to answer questions.
Yes, and those 2 projects did meet our standards.
Yeah. Any questions? So those of you that are new, this part of the agenda used to be this drawn out, drill down into this minutia of information. And, this is kind of how the world has changed for the coordinating board. And in many regards, I think it is a real positive from the standpoint of staff is able to review those, they meet the criteria, we move on and provide that information back to the institution. So we can go move on to big picture items like what we've been covering. All right, agenda item 5I, number 1, is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to Chapter 21, new Subchapter P, concerning the loan repayment program for mental health professionals, SB 239, 84th Texas Legislature. There's supplemental information on the goldenrod paper at your place. Charles Poole's Deputy Commissioner for Student Financial will be available to answer questions. Are you going to make a presentation, Charles?
I'll give you some brief information on it.
Please.
Sure. Senate Bill 239 created a loan repayment program for mental health professionals, while the General Appropriations Act included Contingency Rider 18.60, providing $2,125,000 to fund the program over the course of the biennium. Excuse me. The bill required creation of rules by December 1st, 2015, and these rules are being presented today for your consideration. The rules are modeled after our other successful loan repayment programs, and during the 30-day comment period, we received 1 comment from UT Austin suggesting more detailed clarification of certain items. In all cases, we have incorporated their suggestions. These included clarifying that a particular category of eligibility can be based on Medicaid or CHIP rather than and CHIP, as well as clarifying that eligible loans do not include things like credit cards, parent loans, etc. Our goal is to have applications ready by the end of the calendar year so that the application process for this new program can start in the new year.
Have a motion for approval. The second. Have a second. Any questions? All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All right. Opposed? Carries. Thank you, Charles. Agenda item 5I2 is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to Chapter 21, new Subchapter R, concerning the Dental Education Loan Repayment Program, HB 1, 84th Texas Legislature Appropriations Act page 3, section 41. We have, once again, supplemental information is in the gold paper at your place. Charles, again, is available for questions, and you want to say a couple comments?
Sure. The General Appropriations Act included $220,000 in funding for the Dental Education Loan Repayment Program across the biennium. Since this program had not been funded since the 2010-2011 biennium, the rules related to the program had already been rescinded. These rules are being presented to you today for your consideration so that they can be placed back on the books and we can move forward with the administration of the program. During the 30-day comment period for these rules, one comment was received from the Texas Dental Association. They are highly supportive of the rules and simply suggested that we consider a higher loan repayment amount. While we did not alter the rules based on their response, we did clarify for them that the rules do allow the commissioner or his designee to increase the amount if funding allows. Again, our goal is to have applications ready by the end of the calendar year so that the application process for this program can start in the new year.
Okay. Any questions?
Move approval.
I have a motion, second. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Charles, thank you very much. All right. Agenda item 5J is adjournment. I have a motion. I have a second this time. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. Members, thank you very much. Staff, thank you for your presentations. We are adjourned.